Welcome today. Over the last couple of weeks, we've been doing a series on the AIPOS. So I think it was 2 weeks ago, I did a general overview. Remember, Melissa Boyle joined us, CTO of the CTO at LexisNexis for the government division. We've been working together a lot on building out this platform. And last week, what we did was we focused on the third pillar. And I'm kind of doing this inside out. And the reason for that, as I explained last week, is that with the coding agents, a lot of things are happening really fast. And I felt it was important to get in front of the coding agents and talk more about spec-driven development and how we kind of build a governance model around what we're allowing the agents to do, or how we want the agents to build our enterprise software. So I thought that was really important. So now what I want to do is I want to move, and we're going to go all the way to the left and get into pillar 3 or pillar 1, which is define and design, right? So what we want to make sure we're doing is that we're building the right thing before we build it right. And I used to work with a product manager a bunch of years ago. Really, I think a lot of people know about him. His name's Scott Selhorst. He said this all the time. So again, just kind of put this in context, as we're kind of shifting, when we say AIPOS, basically it's the AI product operating system, right? And so what we're talking about is how do we shift towards using AI to help us deliver our software products, right? And this is a graph I use, or a chart I use, to kind of help keep everybody grounded in our goal, right? I'm not saying you're going to get there right away, but what we want to be able to do is we want to have a target, and we want to question every decision that we're making and new thing that we're doing. We might want to plug in like an AI product that does something here, or an AI agent. But what we also want to think about is that all the agent can do, right? And so how do we then separate out and give AI and agents all the rote stuff that we have to do, and leave us as humans to do the intelligent work, having conversations with our customers and things like that. You'll notice that this pillar 1, is probably the most human involved of the pillars, and we're going to talk about why that is. So by the end of the session, what we want to be able to do is we're going to talk about why it's a 70-30 split. To really want to get into, if we're building a product, why does it matter? What makes it valuable? Can we make it safe? Is it usable? And can we scale it, right? And then want to make sure we're focused on our customers, right? We want to build customer-first products. We don't want to just come up with the hypothesis and say, hey, we need to go do this, right? We saw a lot of that when AI came in. Everybody was like, we need an AI product. It's kind of backwards going that way, right? So we want to make sure we understand that. We need to set our boundaries. What are our risk boundaries? As we go into AI and we can open up more data, we have to really make sure that we have the security blueprint, the security around the data and the guardrails. Not only PII and sharing information, but other information that we sometimes don't think about, right? Because it's secured, like SharePoint, right? Where it's secured behind our firewall. We might have it broken down by folders inside our organization. But once we start to bring that in, we have to make sure that our AI systems adhere to and follow those type of boundaries, right? So we want to be thinking about that. And basically the goal, or what we're trying to get to at the end of pillar 1, is we want to assemble the product blueprint. What are we going to build? Make a go or no-go decision, or do we put it back on the shelf, right? And then we want to start taking a look at it. What we're going to do is we're going to use an example of a customer support ticket triage. Just it's a common thing that I think we can all get our head around. As we go into future examples, we'll actually go into some things and build agents and things like that. But for now, I just want to make sure that it's a problem domain that we can all kind of understand, right? And so, like I said, this is the most human-heavy pillar of all of them, right? So, we can have AI draft and ingest signals, right? We're going to talk about a discovery engine that one of my that Melissa and I have been working on, that basically pulls in all kinds of data for evidence, right? So you can have tickets coming in from your ticketing system from Gong, right? Customer information. Maybe there were Zoom calls where you were having a conversation with a client, right? How do we pull all that information in and then give it context with maybe our CRM system? Maybe our CRM system has customers and their buying habits and how much money they might spend. So maybe we can take evidence and take that context and prioritize feature based on, hey, we had a lot of people ask for this, and it looks like it's maybe it's not huge, but it's a feature that can bring us 10 million, $50 million of revenue every year. Right. So those are the kind of things that we want to be able to do. And again, this isn't new, right? These are things that product coaches and product managers that I've worked with over the years have always talked about doing. The thing is that some people are better at it than others. So some people are more disciplined. I think what's happened to our industry is that we become, not everybody, right? So I hate to make broad sweeping statements, but what we see a lot of is somebody sets a strategy, somebody builds a list of features that we have to go build, and then we just go off and start building them. Well, with AI, we have a lot more, we have a lot better ability to analyze all of that data and then to help us build ways to validate it, right? So some of this conversation today, it'll bleed in a little bit into pillar 2 where we do validation. But one of the things that I want to be clear about, and we talked about this before, is that these pillars are kind of, they're iterative flows that may cut across and go back and forth. It's not a straightforward workflow, right? And so what we need is that the AI can draft a lot of things, but the humans need to frame it, right? We understand our business, we understand our customers. What AI is going to do is it's going to find patterns in the data. If we have a new idea or something our customers didn't think about, the AI is not necessarily going to come up with it. It might be able to propose some things, but us as humans that understand our market are going to be thinking about how people use our system through conversations with our customers. Maybe somebody in your engineering department came up with a great idea because they understand what we're trying to do, and then they understand the new technology coming out, right? And so they may have ideas that we didn't even think about. Now, the question is, how do we then go validate those ideas, and can we validate them and then have evidence in our system to help us with that? So a lot of human involvement in this phrase, in this pillar, right? And then we want to make sure that we're framing the right problem, right? So AI judgment on its own isn't what we want. And what we're seeing is that we were able to kind of get away with this. I'd argue maybe not so much, but felt like we were getting away with this before because we could adjust. Because as we're working at the things I talked about last week, that meandering through a sprint. Well, what happens is we can meander through trying to figure out what the problem is we're trying to solve for our customers. With AI and the speed of AI, that becomes more and more of a problem, right? Because we have an idea, somebody says build this feature, it gets built in a couple of hours, maybe a day, where it used to take 2 or 3 weeks before, maybe a month, right? So now all of a sudden these things are happening too fast. So the fastest and best way to deal with that is to get it up front. Have these conversations up front, and it's the cheapest way to solve the problem. Otherwise, we're going to go through, we're going to build a lot of things. AI is going to help us build it really fast. We're going to start testing it. We're going to put it in front of our customers. They're not going to be happy with it. And then we're going to have to refactor all that, right? So, and we see this in the statistics, right? Where there's a lot of churn in some of these AI products that are being built. It's not that the code generators are bad necessarily. It's not that the developers using it are bad. It's that we're starting off from not good or tight requirements, right? Again, same problem we've always had. It's just now it's exponentially worse. So again, 70% human, right? I kind of talked about this, right? AI does the heavy lifting on understanding the signals that are coming from our customers. We can take all that data and, with AI, do some normalization, do some clustering, dedupe information, and then track history, right? So just because one important customer today said something doesn't mean we want to drop everything we're doing and move on to that, right? So we may see that. Then we want to be able to drive back into the history of things that are happening and see if we're seeing this pattern show up. Same thing with something new pops up, and maybe 6 months ago we decided that wasn't a good idea. Maybe it's still not a good idea. We'd like to have that evidence stored someplace, right? So we need to do that. AI can help us with all that. And then the humans, basically what they're going to do is they're going to talk about the outcome. So how do we frame this outcome, right? How do we make sure that the result really matters? How do we go and talk to our clients and say, hey, we're going to do this thing. Is this something you would use, and would it help you? How much time would it save you? Would it help you increase your revenue? Things like that, right? So we want to understand what that means for our clients. So this is what we're starting to see. The statistics, again, coming out of my favorite survey from Pharos. And so 68% of features shipped are rarely or ever used. Wait, that was way before Pharos actually. They've been saying this statistic forever, right? I used to use this example, and I don't know if it's become folklore now or if it's actually true. But a bunch of years ago, Microsoft was trying to decide if they should put more features into Excel or take part of the team to help, I think, integrate it into Outlook or Office. I think that was the story. So what they did was they went out and they surveyed their customers, right? Which is perfect, right? You want to go out and talk to your people, right? And so they go out and they categorize everybody, and the people basically self-categorize. Say, I'm an expert. I'm a super expert. I've been using Excel for 10 years, and I know everything. And so then what they did was they took these experts of Excel and then further had them work through and show them what exactly they use in Excel. And it turned out that people that deemed themselves an expert, that knew Excel better than anybody else, were using about 10 to 15% of the product, right? Now, it gets interesting because it might spread to different features, but it's kind of eye-opening when you think about that. And I'd argue that most products, when we go out and do that, that's what happens. And so what we want to do is we want to cut that down, and we want to be delivering what it is our clients need next, right? And we have to make sure that this isn't fuzzy, that we really understand it, and then we can scope to the information that we're getting. So building the wrong thing faster doesn't do us any good. So, velocity is starting to become a dangerous definition, right? So what's happening is, through these agents, if we give it kind of a fuzzy feature, what's happening is that, again, before we used to kind of protect ourselves because we leaned on the developers a lot, or the engineering team, to come back. They're doing demos, doesn't feel right. They're going back and forth with product. Dates would slip, but even though dates slip, probably ended up with a better product, right? Better than pushing it out. But what we're seeing now is that now what we're doing is we're taking that fuzziness and we're 3 times faster, right? 5 times faster. We're just pumping things out that aren't really validated with our customer. And so now what happens is we go all the way through the process, spend the time and money to deploy it, time and money for our customers taking a new version, time and money for our customers to give us feedback that's telling us we didn't give them what they wanted, right? And so what we really want to think about is the cheapest place to solve this problem is upfront. It's during definition. So we have to be able to answer this question. What are we building? Who's it for? Why does it matter? And we need to start getting into more detail, right? So it's not just, we talk about personas a lot, but it's not just persona, but what's the job they're trying to do in that persona? And how do we capture that, and how do we move forward? Why does it matter to that person for that specific job that they have to do? And if we understand that, we're going to start to understand why it's valuable to them. And then what are any risks or things like that we need to deal with, right? So if you go through this effort and come into an output, what you should have is something called a solution blueprint. There are other artifacts that different product teams might use, but a solution blueprint is a pretty good example of that, right? Whatever that is, and we'll talk about the bones and the skeleton of what's in a solution blueprint. And so whatever you call it, whatever you actually build, we want something that kind of codifies all this research, points back to the evidence, and then decides, okay, this is what we're going to go build, right? So again, we want to target the users and the job to be done, right? So, who do we serve? What's the job? Are they what basically what are they hiring the product to do, right? And then where AI improves speed and quality is good, has to improve confidence. And this again, it goes beyond a persona. We have to actually take the persona, and we'll get into an example with a support rep as to how we look at what is the job that they're trying to do that we're trying to help them with. And then we want to put a hypothesis together, but we want to be able to measure it, right? So how do we, what's the right thing to measure? Are we trying to increase speed? Are we trying to increase quality? Yeah, increase speed, right? Increase quality, right? So for a support team, it's important that we get them on and off a call in a short period of time, but we don't want the quality of the answer to go down, and we don't want our CSAT scores, like our if we send out customer surveys, we actually want them going up, right? And so how do we do that? And how do we measure? So what are these metrics that we're going to use when we come up with a hypothesis? Because we can then take those and use them. Like I said, this kind of bleeds into pillar 2, is take that and go, okay, how are we going to measure this? Let's try to validate this with 10 customers, 20 customers. Maybe we open up this new solution to a subset of our support agents and see what happens to them, right? And then what we don't want to do is look for a solution and looking for a job to do, right? Like, so for example, and we still see this, like, we should add AI here. Why, right? Does it make sense? Don't know, right? So we're going to go through, but basically we want to scope out an MVP. It could be an MVP, whatever you call this thing, right? It could be a prototype. But a lot of people talk about the most viable product or minimally viable product. That's why I love and hate the MVP acronym, right? So there are different things. I have a friend that calls it the most usable or least usable product. The least amount of work that he uses. I forget that initials he uses, but we see the point, right? It's like, how do I get something out that my clients can start using, but I can get it out quickly? Again, with AI, it's even quicker. Can I be pushing out MVPs and iterating on them every day, right? What's the other thing you have to look at on the other side is that is my customer or my client, can they absorb that kind of change, right? So you want to make sure you're designing this experience and make sure that we actually understand what good feels like and that it feels good when it gets in their hands. And then we also need to understand the context, right? So just because somebody complains about something doesn't mean that's the thing we have to fix, right? There are cases. So for example, let's say our call tickets are going up. And it's a spike. All of a sudden, it just started happening, and these particular calls are about fixing or installing a product, and the call takes longer than a normal call, right? So let's say normally they're getting off the phone in 45 seconds, and this is taking a minute 10, right? Well, if you're getting a lot of calls, that starts to add up, right? And so somebody calls up and says, hey, we need to, or somebody comes up with a brilliant idea that you need more support reps so we can offload these type of questions to that support team and we can free everybody else up and we can move forward, right? So if you're taking this response out of context, that may seem like the right thing to do. Now, the other thing is that if you have the context and you see the evidence of this information, you're going to see the tickets started to spike around a certain time. What other evidence do we have? Maybe we did a product release right around that time, right? And maybe the product is more difficult to manage than our current set of products, right? Maybe it adds a flavor of an admin panel that our customers aren't used to. Maybe it's a little bit more detailed or technical than they're used to having. And so really the right thing to do is to look at that context and then go back, and it maybe changes to the product, not changes to how we support it, right? And so we want to make sure that not only do we have the evidence that says we need to change things, but what is that context? Maybe we have 3 or 4 things that we could work on, and then we have 2 very highly valued customers that are bringing in most of our revenue, and they have a different set of problems. Does that change the way we want to weight it, right? So we have evidence of a problem. What context are we going to use? possibly out of our CRM system, out of feedback from our product managers, maybe their email, things like that. What are the things we can add to that evidence to help us prioritize what we should look at next? And so if you think about the blueprint, the way it would flow is, or this the evidence, sorry, the signals for the evidence and the context is that we want to get this signaling. This is very AI-ish, right? So bring in calls from a Gong system. Maybe it's we Outlook. Maybe we do weekly calls with the customer. Maybe they're just sales calls that the sales team saves this information and they have other products besides Gong. Might have support tickets from Zendesk, ServiceNow, things like that. CRM systems, Salesforce, can't think of HubSpot, other things like that. So, and then telemetry data, right? And so, again, most organizations do this where they have applications. They will push information into logs and things like that. As we're looking at what kind of context we need or evidence we need to make decisions, we may want to change how we instrument our applications and what we do with that information, right? Again, it used to be that we were just looking at it to monitor the systems, but now with AI, the more data we have, the more analysis we can do, right? And so we might want to feed that telemetry data back into our discovery engine that takes in calls and support tickets, right? So maybe it takes in calls and support tickets, and it's also getting some telemetry data for the specific application that's working or running, and help them make decisions. Maybe we built a feature and we guaranteed our customers, like this happens a lot with Gen AI apps, right? So you build an LLM solution, you want to have some non-functional requirement that talks about response time, right? Because with the LLMs, depending on how much they're turning through, it could take a while, and it may hold clients up. Maybe 30 minutes is way too long. Maybe it isn't. And so what you want to do, so let's say you come out and you agree, you're talking to your customers, and they're like, hey, we love the fact to have an AI in here, but we still need response time to be under 5 seconds, which, in the days of the web, 5 seconds seems like a lifetime, right? But so it says 5 seconds. So you deliver the product and it's on average returning in 3 seconds, 3.2, whatever. And then with the telemetry data, what you maybe start to see that response time is starting to tick up. And now it's getting to 4 seconds, 4.1. Your SLA with your customer was 5. So now what happens is without getting phone calls from your customer, this information can feed back into your discovery engine. And you can see that your flagship application is starting to creep up in response time. Now, maybe that's okay, maybe it's not. So what's nice about that is you get that information ahead of time during your discovery process, and now you're going into your roadmap planning, and this doesn't become an emergency. This is something that you can blend into the work that you're doing. You can take a look at why is this getting higher? If it's just the way it is, how do you communicate that to your customers before it becomes a problem for them, right? So we want this discovery engine to be able to pull in all the pertinent data, make sure that we separate evidence from context, and build that and feed that into an intelligence layer, right? And so in pillar 1, when we talk about discovery, and then we come in, we have this data coming in, we discover it, we bring it in, and we do some normalization on the data. Maybe we dedupe it, start to extract out the evidence, and use some algorithms to prioritize it. And then we take and link it with context. Maybe that changes the prioritization slightly. And then we aggregate that into a set of signals. And these signals may be simply a list that we can then feed to our PMs that rank opportunities, and then feed insights into the PM, right? So how cool would that be as a product manager as you're sitting there and you come in and you have a list of opportunities that you can investigate, right? You click on the opportunity, you can drill back in and see which customers are looking for it, which salespeople had calls around this, and then insights. So you can drill in and back and see the evidence of how that came to that response. And then you think about validation that we'll talk about next week, but you could then decide, hey, do I want to build a prototype? Today's day and age with all the tools that are out there, whether it's Lovable or AHA has a builder and a prototype engine, but basically you can build prototype UIs and that way you can build these prototypes or prototypes faster and you can send them out to your clients and get some feedback. Maybe all you want to do is generate a discovery script, right? That either you or your salespeople could use to call into the client and say, hey, I just had some questions. We're getting a bunch of people that are interested in this area, and you're already talking to somebody that's interested in the area because you have the evidence from the call logs, from the support tickets, and then your CRM system, right? So now you have all this information that you've fed in, and now you can now go through and validate it, whether it's through customer conversations, talking to other engineers, talking to people in the organization, but you can now drill back in to the evidence, right? And so that would be the discovery side, and this discovery engine needs to do these things. And then, what we really don't want it to do, right? So we don't want to figure out what the solution is doing up front, right? We're still in a discovery phase, right? We want to make sure that we're defining a guardrail at the design time to understand how much do we want to spend to investigate this, and then as we investigate it, we'll be able to determine, not exact science, but how we would value this product, and then how much money we think we should spend, and it helps feed into that go or no go decision, right? And so what we don't want to be doing is discovering this in production, right? With incidents from customer support, we lose trust, and all kinds of other things like that, right? So in order to do this, we really need to understand and decide up front how we're going to validate it, right? And it may not be all of these, but it may be all of these with some percentage higher or lower. So what's the value? What is the outcome that's going to move the client for this job to be done? Can people actually use it? Is it usable, right? Does it take, maybe it solves a problem, but it takes 25 minutes to get a response back. Maybe that's unusable to your clients, right? You need to know that. Quality and safety, always, right? Is it accurate? Are we staying in bounds? Can we really build it, right? One of the other things during validation that you want to be able to do is you may have a great idea for a feature, but maybe your organization isn't ready to deploy it, right? So it could be something as what seems simple, like a new Gen AI app. You can put synthetic data together and show a new Gen AI app pretty quickly, but if your infrastructure isn't built to handle security and things like that, and the drift from a Gen AI application, it takes a little bit more time, right? So is your engineering staff capable of building those type of applications? If they're not, do we need to do some training before we do that or whatever? But the idea is that, is it feasible to build in the time frame that we want to build it, right? We need to weigh that into our decision. And then, can our clients adopt it? Are they ready for it? A lot of us have clients that either through regulations or just the way they are in the organization, that'll only take new product updates every 6 months, for example. So all those things need to get weighed in. So the way we do this is, what we're trying to do is we're trying to work towards this solution blueprint, right? And so on the discovery side, we may run a workshop like this, and this is kind of a simulation of what a Miro board might look like. Probably be spread out a little bit more, but in order to get it on the screen, just this type of information. So what would happen is we have this problem and some sort of context. So the context is, again, with the discovery engine, we could get this information, right? We have 75 support tickets that all talk about this type of thing, right? It was deemed not to be a defect because the product was never expected to be used that way. But we've had 15 clients come in and ask about this, right? So what that signal is telling us is that they're trying to do something with this new feature that we didn't expect, and that's probably good news, right? That's something new. Let's talk to them. If there's 15, there's probably 100, right? And so you want to understand, that context, and then what kind of impact it could have. And with that impact, now you want to go into what is the evidence and what's the evidence graph that your discovery process has created for you, right? So in this case, you might have interviewed support agents, right? And you stored and saved those interviews. You have audit tickets that you can track. How long did it take them to solve a specific type of problem? And go through that. Some time study, figuring out that the average of 1.8 minutes per ticket on triage, and you want to try to cut that down. And then, what are the customers telling us, right? Or we're on these support calls or the sales calls, and the sales guy is trying to solve a new feature, and they're talking about how it takes too long to get a response from support, right? So you want to know about those things so that you can talk about what it is you want to talk about with the customer. So your discovery engine needs to be able to do that. And just a shameless plug, we're working on a discovery engine that does exactly that. It's going to be pretty cool. And then what you do from that is you come up with a hypothesis, right? So based on all this, what do we think would solve the problem, and what are our expected outcomes? So in this case, we're thinking about some sort of AI assistant. We think we can reduce triage time by about 30%. And then because of that, it's going to improve, not because of that. Basically, if we improve the routing, it's going to help us solve the problems faster. And then because of this, we're going to increase our customer satisfaction with our internal agents, right? So in this case, our job to be done is an internal agent persona trying to answer questions that typically take them a lot of time to research, right? And so then during the workshop, what you'll do is you'll come up with a couple solutions, right? 2, 3, whatever. And in this case, like the solutions came up, we could do an AI category suggestions, basically plug in an AI engine in between, the phone call and the information getting routed. We could automatically categorize things and override assignments. So maybe automatically categorize them and send specific tickets to specific agents with specific type training, right? And then the other one could be just a simple rule-based system, right? And then you're going to go through and you're going to talk about your assumptions and risks, right? They're just going to document them. What are some of the assumptions you're making? What are the risks? In this case, if it's incorrect or we're trying to auto-assign, what happens if we auto-assign and it goes to the wrong agent? Is that a disaster? Is that a fiasco? Or is it just spike that one agent for a little while, right? So you want to make sure you're documenting that and a typical risk mitigation plan, right? And so then at this point, you want to go validate your idea, right? You don't want to just jump in and start writing code at this point, right? Because you have 3 options. So what you want to do is, you might run a couple of experiments, right? One is maybe a controlled pilot with a couple of the teams where you basically rotate each of these options, right? And maybe for some of them, you do AI category suggestions and they do it themselves. Other cases, you do option B. And then in a third case, you do option C, and you send it to, a percentage. You divide up a cohort of your support reps and run these validations, right? And then you get metrics back on that. If you get an option that's actually dropping it from 1.8 down to 1.2 minutes, and you get your 30% reduction, that's probably the option you want to go with, right? And then, you have, I'd still run some satisfaction surveys for those support reps and see how they feel and see if it helped them, right? And then at the end, what you'd really need to be able to do is decide, do you want to pivot? Like maybe all 3 of those options are terrible and they don't really work for the support team, right? So maybe you want to pivot and try something else. Maybe out of that, one of the support reps came back and had a really good idea, and you're like, hey, we didn't even think about that. Why don't we try that? And go through and see if that solves a problem. Maybe you've decided to proceed. This looks really good. we're going to move this on to the next part in our process, right? Probably a development cycle. Or you're going to park it or defer for later or possibly kill it, right? And so there are probably some guesses to impact at scale, number of tickets that are coming in, and you break that down, right? So what we're trying to get to is our solution blueprint. So these are the kind of the 6 categories that we talked about, right? What are the users and the jobs to be done? What's the measurable value hypothesis? The MVP scope, data source and context. I'm going to go through these in detail, so I'm kind of reading through them fast. Risk boundaries, guardrails, and success criteria. So the idea is that if your exit criteria is met, you create the blueprint and you're ready to validate maybe in a bigger cohort, right? Because you're going to flip back and forth, do a little bit of validation while you're going through the discovery process. So here's what a solution blueprint might look like, right? Could be on a mural board, could be, it usually turns into a deck that you're presenting to people. But at this point, you're making a decision, right? So who are the users and the jobs to be done? Support admins, team leads, operation managers, and their primary job is they want to quickly understand new tickets, apply the right category, and route or resolve with an accurate context, right? And so the desired outcome, resolve faster, fewer handoffs, a higher customer sat. And so the rest of this has to support that. So what's your measurable value hypothesis? And you're going to put hypothesis together. You want numbers in here, right? You want to be able to hold yourself accountable to counts and numbers, right? Because just saying increasing something or decreasing time, it's too vague. You can't actually measure that. If you can, when we talk about the rest of the AIPOS, we talk about having a control plane that's running across the system. These are the type of things that we can put into our system, we can measure and validate against as the system is running, right? And this is the feedback loop that's coming from when we instrument our products. Can we instrument that information and feed it back in? And if it looks like we're not hitting our 30% decrease in time, what do we do about that? Is there something we can do now to keep basically incrementally making it better, right? We don't want to wait for a quarter. We run a bunch of numbers and everybody goes, yeah, our number, our support didn't decrease by 30%, it only decreased by 20. Well, after a quarter, people are like, 20 is better than 30 or better than nothing, right? We really want a 30. Let's see what we can do next quarter. But if it's happening on a continuous basis, it gives you time to do something about it. And then you actually want to choose what you're going to do for the MVP, right? And so in this case, what they did was the AI suggests categories of intent of new tickets, and it gives you a confidence score and the context. So now what it's doing is in the discovery engine, we're getting those tickets and the evidence, and then we have the context maybe from our CRM system. And what's happening now is that these things are coming through, and while it's categorizing the tickets that are coming through, it's giving it a confidence score as to if it thinks it's going to the right place, right? And then you have your agent flow and describe that. So basically, what you want to do is you want to discuss which of the 3 options did you pick. Now, it may be a modification. What I've seen a lot of times happen is you have an A, B, or C, and you start to validate it, and maybe you end up blending 2 of the solutions together. Whatever that decision is, that needs to be scoped into the MVP. And then the next thing is you got to make sure that you have your data source and the context you need, right? So do I have the historical data to help make this decision? Content data, user feedback, and make sure our governance is in place with PII and things like that. If you get to this point, I've seen a number of times where you don't have access to the data, or it's not historical data, or it doesn't feel like it goes back far enough. And so what ends up happening is that you may have to pause and start collecting this data to help you in the future, right? So there's a couple of things that you need to think about. Assumption and guardrails, but then success criteria. And if you see, these are specific numbers, right? So I want triage time. Right now, median's 4.6. I want to be able to decrease that. I want to get it under 3.4. Correction rate, I want that under 20%. It's currently at 28. CSAT, want to get it over 90, right? So we want to increase it by 5. Escalation rate to tier 2. It's at 18% now. Can we get that under 15? And then adoption, right? So you want actual numbers that you're going to validate against. And so this is a nice one pager to bring to executive team during planning, right? Have the evidence backed up to where you can drive in and get the evidence from your discovery system, and then present this, right? And this is MVP scope. It's a good idea, and it's concise, and it's manageable, and it's actionable, right? Which is what we need. So what would end up happening is you might have a follow-on slide and say, hey, look, so here's what's going to happen, right? Ticket's going to come in. It's going to be new inbound support ticket. Context is going to be assembled. So now we have the relevant help document, product docs, pass resolve tickets, right? This is great for if it's an AI engine. You feed all this to your AI app, right? And then the model returns a recommended category and a confidence level based on the information that it got. Agent confirms it or edits it. You might have a validation agent, and then the ticket's routed, and then the outcomes are logged, right? And so that's a nice tight workflow for something that's very specific, right? That's a feature that you could hand off, and the development team, with your product managers, product owners, you could build the requirements for this fairly easy and implement this and be able to prove that it works, right? So we've been talking about the 8 lanes. These are underlying every one of the pillars, and we'll talk about these briefly at the end of each of these calls. But some of them, the ones that are in blue, are the ones for the discovery, are more important than the others. Not that the others aren't important, but obviously you want your solution aligned to an outcome. The data and source context that you're using needs to be fresh and has coverage. You don't want to if your evidence source doesn't have everything that it needs, if it's missing information from your CRM system, it's kind of hard to use that to validate anything, right? And then you definitely have to have your guardrails. You want them set up front, and then you need to have a measurable hypothesis. And then the rest of these will run through, obviously, as you're going through these things. I don't want to leave engineering out, right? Because a lot of times, a lot of great ideas come from the engineers. And if the product managers are working with the engineering team, what ends up happening is that the engineers start to hear kind of ideas you have. They may say something that gives you a great idea, right? And then also validate it, right? One of the spikes that you might do from a discovery side is you have something that you think is a good idea. You might drop a spike off as a validation to a delivery team to see if it's even feasible to do in your environment, right? So pretty valid way to validate something, right? So like I said, the pillar 1 and pillar 2, the discovery and design, and the validation pillar, they can work, they'll work hand in hand. So again, the cheapest place to be right is up front during definition. Define and design is really where you're collecting your evidence. AI can help a ton here, right? There's a lot of data. It can bring the data together. It can help you summarize it. You can do some regression analysis against it if that's what you want to do. You can annotate it with all kinds of other information. Again, it could be emails, all kinds of other things, right? Ticketing systems coming in, you have your CRM systems. So you want that define and design stage to be evidence-based. And when you create the MVP, you want that to be metrics-based, right? So now you have measures, you're taking some of the guesswork out, right? Sometimes it's still like, I got this feeling, we got to go do this. But we want to put metrics together whenever possible. So that was a quick run through for the define and design. Our next pillar is going to be about rapid validation. What I'll do next week is I'm actually going to I'll put some sample data together that ties together the type of things that we see in the evidence, and then what the kind of the stages that we would take for validation, right? Because validation isn't just, a lot of us think about prototypes that we would send to a customer, but there are probably about 8 or 9 different validation types that you'd want to go through. And we'll list those out and talk through them and then find out how we tie that validation back to the evidence and the context that we've been working on. So just remember, prompting is an interface, specifications are the system, right? So as we do this, we get the information we need to build a really tight spec that we can then feed into a coding agent, right? Thank you. Are there any questions? I know I kind of went through that pretty quickly.
Hey, Marty, we have a couple questions here. Number one, kind of going back to the beginning of what you were talking about, you were saying 30% of should be human in the loop. Question is who makes up this 30% of the human in the loop? Who has to be there and who would be nice to be there making these decisions?
Yeah, it's typically going to be sorry, my head got really big here. I don't know what's going on. But so typically it's the product manager and the product team, right? So while you're in discovery and design, it's typically going to be driven by the product managers, and what they'll do is I like to see where they rotating almost like a three amigos for a sprint when you're going over features. Is that you're going to have your product manager, and they're the ones that understand the business and where you're trying to go, and then you have your engineers who understand your products really well, right? So you don't want to leave them out of this process. A lot of times I like to rotate in engineers that are interested in this type of work, right? Because it is extra on top of what they're doing. But that 30% is kind of this conversation among those people. And then when I count that 30%, I also think about, they're then doing some strategic planning, right? So you kind of carve off some of the time for that.
Okay. We've got another a question about let me see if I can rephrase this. So the question is, if we are putting this extra process in front, is there a feeling that it might stifle exploration or creativity to a certain extent? And how do we balance that?
Yeah, so this should be happening in product organizations with skilled product managers. This type of work is happening. It's happening somehow, some way, right? They're either collecting it by hand right now and then getting together on a mural board and sketching things out. And then there are a lot of different techniques that they use to interview a customer. There's a voice of a customer canvas. Product teams are doing this now. So with the advent of AI, what happens is that the process actually goes a little bit faster because a lot of the information that they're collecting, like they're pulling, product managers I know will ask for a pull from Zendesk or from whatever your ticketing system is. They'll go into the CRM. They may call salespeople directly about, hey, what are you hearing from the customers about these kind of problems? So this work is happening, right? So this isn't net new. But if we add AI into the mix, it makes it a lot easier for those people to then basically get the evidence out of these systems that they use. Like when Melissa was on the call and she was talking about how they try to encourage the developers to go in and listen to or listen to the Gong calls. Well, there are a lot of them, right? And the sales guys are doing, and there is great information in there. She's like, man, if you ever take the time and listen to these things, it's gold, but it takes a lot of time, right? So if we have something up front that can, if we can AIify it and bring that information together, then it actually makes this process a little bit faster and a little bit more analytical.
Great. That's the last question we have at the moment.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. We'll see you next week for rapid validation. We'll keep diving into this. So thank you.